This is Coop's Comedy Corner. Buckle up because it's funny as Coop's Comedy Corner.
Welcome to Coop's Comedy Corner. I'm your host, Steve Cooper. We're back for another week. And you know, my guest today, she was on my other show, Cooper Talk, in May of 2017. And she's a stand-up comic. She's a writer, a producer, and she has a great podcast. And I'm going to tell you, with Cooper Talk, I get some great guests, and I get really jealous. That's what podcasters do when I see some of her guests. I'm like, how did she get him? And she hosts with Steve Mason. It's called the Culture Pop Podcast. And my guest is Sue Kolinsky. How you doing, Sue?
I'm good. I cannot believe it's been that long since I've seen you.
Yeah, it flies. Now, I want to talk about your podcast because we'll talk about your producing and your Emmy nominations and your stand-up comedy and your 3 Evening at the Improv appearances. But the podcast, Steve Mason's a pretty big shot in LA radio. How did this all come about? How did this come all about?
So around 20 something years ago, I met Steve at it was a celebrity golf tournament that I used to do in Seattle that Richard Karn hosted. And the gig was you would do stand up one show, and then you'd get to hang out and golf, which was the greatest thing in the world. So the year Steve came up, they had expanded it to a week, and they incorporated a celebrity softball game. So Steve was doing play-by-play. He got invited to come up there to tape his show. He wasn't on. It was only audio. He had a show in San Diego, a radio show with John Ireland, and he came up to do his show remotely in Seattle, and I got invited to sit up in the booth with Kathy Ladman, and Mark Harmon. So the 4 of us were doing color commentary on the game. And he was very impressed that I knew a lot about baseball. And we just clicked. So later on in the day, I bumped into him in the lobby and he said, "You want to come on my radio show tomorrow morning?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "What time?" And he says, "It's 6:00. Now, the celebrities that were there that week are like Samuel Jackson, Josh Charles, Bill Gates was there. I mean, it was mammoth talent. I think Sylvester Stallone may have been there. So I looked at him and I said, "Who canceled?" And he starts laughing and he said, No, I really want you." And I said, "You're so full of it." I said, "Of all the celebrities, you want me?" He said, "Well, we had a great time today. You're very funny. Come on the show." So I came on his show, and he asked me a baseball. He wanted me to ask a baseball question for his listeners to get a prize. And my question was something like, who had the most relief wins of all the Dodgers or something. So that was my question. But I didn't have the answer. I just asked the question. So people are calling in and they're saying, and he keeps on saying, "No, it wasn't that person. It wasn't that person." He said, "Okay, Sue, who was it?" And I said, "I don't know." I said, "You have a sports show." So that became a running joke. And from that, he invited me to come on his show every Friday. And I would just come on and do like trivia questions. So that became like a running theme. And then he had a short-lived Fox television series, which was based on his podcast. So I would go on that, and I had a long run with that. And he got offered a gig on WNEW in New York, and he was supposed to do it with Jimmy Kimmel, and Kimmel didn't want to do it. So he called me up and he said, "Would you like to come?" And I was living in LA. He said, "Would you like to move to New York and do this radio show with me?" And I was in a relationship with somebody. I was writing at the time, and I didn't have a writing gig. And I said, "That's the iconic station. I grew up listening to it." So I moved to New York. I didn't have to audition. they just hired me on his recommendation. I came there to meet everybody before I moved, and I happened to get a gig at Caroline's for the weekend, and all the radio people came to see me. And thank God I had a great set, so they didn't have like buyer's remorse. And I did morning radio with him for a year and a half. And when that was over, we both, moved back to LA. I was friends with him, kind of on and off, and we kind of lost touch. And I guess it was like maybe 5 years ago, he contacted me and he said, "How would you like to do a podcast?" My dog is playing with a toy. Wait a minute. Get out of here. Get out of here. So he said, "How would you like to do a podcast based on our radio show?" And I said, "Oh, that's great." And here we are 5 years later.
Well, it's funny. You get really good guests. As I said, because I've had for Coop Talk, I've had a lot of good guests, but I always sit there and I go, like you had Michael Mando, and you just had Paul Guilfoyle, and there's you just said Jesse Martin, who my wife loves that show, and she loved it when Law and Order. I told her, I said, my guest just said Jesse Martin. Do you guys get, like, for me, I've gotten the guests because I've done it for so long, and I get a lot of music guests because I'm really in tight with music PR people. How do you guys get your guests? Is it because of Steve's name? Is it because your producing background and your name? Or how do you get these? Because you get really quality guests.
Well, it's a combination. In the beginning, we were just booking it ourselves. So Steve, he's very good friends with Bryan Cranston. He owned movie theaters with Bryan Cranston some years ago. So their friendship is, I don't know, maybe is almost as long as my friendship with Steve. So we got Bryan through him. And, I got Leno, I got Paul Reiser, he gets Shay Jackson Jr., people like that. But we hired a booker a couple of years ago. We've had a few bookers over the years, and this latest booker, she's amazing. She's out of New York, and she just gets us great people. And, and a lot of the people that come on have the same publicist. So if the actors like doing the show, they'll tell their other actor friends, "Oh, you should go on the show. It's a lot of fun."
So for you, what's it like? Because for me, I do one-on-one interviews, and I don't know if I could handle a two-on-one per se interview, because I think sometimes you might feel to step over each other's feet. Also, I don't prepare. I study, I do my research on my guests, but I don't write any questions down. I just go and I talk, because I think if I'm talking with creative people, they have the same mindset. They're going to be able to run with it. Like, you're a comic, in your heart, you're a comic, but you're not one of the comics. I know you're not going to be doing bits. You know how to work, in the moment. So how is it for you two? Because, it's two people and you have great guests. So you probably both want to ask something. How do you do that? Because I always wonder, how do you find a happy median?
Well, in the beginning, we would kind of step on one another. And then, we do it on Zoom. So then we would have the chat open, and, it would be like, "Okay, now you talk, it's your turn, it's your turn." And it just kind of seemed kind of too rote, it's like, oh, it just seemed, it didn't seem natural to be having a conversation where sometimes you do cut people off in a conversation. So we wanted it to be more natural. So sometimes now, and it doesn't always work, like I may go like this, which means I want to ask something after, but sometimes I go like that just because I go like that. And it's not that I have something, I always have something to say. So we work it out. But just to tell you a funny story, years ago, there was a comedy competition in LA, and a girlfriend of mine, I don't know if you know Monica Piper, she's very, very funny. So she was in the competition, and she can only be on stage, I guess it was, I don't know, it was less than 10 minutes. So I was in the audience, and she said to me, "I want you to give me a signal when I have 2 minutes." I said, "No problem." And she said, "Okay." So the signal was I was going to go like that with my glasses, right? So she's maybe on stage for 5 minutes, and my glasses slipped. So I went like that. and it completely threw her off. And she comes off stage, and she actually came off stage a little bit earlier than what she was supposed to. And she was so pissed off at me. She said, "I didn't think I was on stage for 8 minutes." And I said, "You weren't."
No, it's funny. You mentioned like Leno and Roger, and you probably know them from the stand-up comedy days. So, you knew a lot of people, and he knows a lot of people. And then you worked with the Osbournes, and you're at Sex and the City. So you know a lot of like connected people. But is there any guests that you have gotten on this new show in the last year that you were like, holy shit? Like me, when I interviewed Steven Van Zandt, and I was like, he's looking at me, and I blow it. In the beginning, I got so nervous. I love him, and we're both from New Jersey. And if you're from New Jersey, is it Teller pork roll or Teller ham? It's a big thing. So I asked him, I go, you're the mayor, everyone loves you in New Jersey. Is it Teller pork roll or Teller ham? And he goes, I don't know. I'm a vegan. I guess I'm an obstinate. It's like I was sitting there going, holy shit. I get Steven Van Zandt on, and I blow it in the first question. But then I recoiled and got him back. But I was like, oh wow, because sometimes you get people, you're in awe. Has there been anyone that you're actually like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm talking to this person?
I'm trying to think. You know who we got. They're not real famous, but we got the filmmakers who did the Navalny documentary. So we got the filmmaker, and we got one of the reporters, and I was totally in awe talking to these guys. So it's more people like that than it is actors. But I'm trying to think if there's anybody like, because we have gotten big people.
You're getting a lot of big people. I see it all the time. But you know them, a lot of those people, though.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, I remember the first time I talked to Bryan Cranston, and even though Steve's friends with him, Steve, he throws great parties, and I've seen Bryan at his parties, but like years ago, I just never got an opportunity to go over to Bryan Cranston and say hi. So the first time he came on, I was really in awe. And now when he comes on, he's been on, 3 or 4 times. He gives me shit, we joke around, and, and it's fun. But I kind of treat it like they're just people,
I do the same. I do the same. I go, it's my show. And but I'm in awe sometimes, because especially I'm a big music guy. So when I get these musicians, I'm like, I interviewed Kenny Jones from The Who, and I'm like, oh my God, I saw him at the Spectrum, and I drank vermouth for some reason, and I got sick after the show. And for me, I'm like, holy crap, they're years later. So it is pretty amazing that when you get to talk to these people. And you're right, though. I have not, and I've done Cooper Talk, I've done 1,040 episodes.
Wow.
And not one person has been a jerk. Not one. I have not. And that's the thing people don't get. They go, oh, I heard that person's an asshole. I'm like, well, maybe you were sitting there bothering them at a restaurant, so maybe they were an asshole. But when you talk to them, they're just normal. Because I always say, anyone who's in the entertainment business, we're 50% narcissistic and we're 50% insecure. It's a mixture. So we all know what we're going through. I mean, that's a generalization, but it's just, it's funny. Most of them are, all of them are pretty much normal.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I remember when I did the radio show with Steve, we had one kind of weird clunker experience. We had, oh God, Mick Jagger's first wife. What's her name? I'm like blanking on her name.
Hall.
No, not Jerry Hall.
No, Bianca Jagger.
Bianca Jagger came on, and one of the mandate was that she wanted to talk about her humanitarian work, and she kind of didn't want to talk about Mick Jagger, but we kind of made a deal like, we'll talk all about what you're doing, but you gotta give a little bit to us, as far as your relationship with Mick or whatever. And so it was agreed that was going to happen. And then when it came up, she didn't want to talk about it, and we just cut the interview short, because after that it was like, we could talk about the humanitarian stuff, and it's great and it's important, and I respect you for doing it, but how do we have Bianca Jagger on the show and we don't talk about the Stones? So
exactly.
And she got really ornery with us, and it was really uncomfortable. And we ended the interview, and I remember we talked to each other after, and I looked at Steve and I said, I can't believe we just got into a fight with Bianca Jagger. I mean, it was just
That's awesome, man. So I want to go back to the big. You got your roots in entertainment in stand up,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, when did you start stand up? Did you start with Kathy Ladman? Did you start with like Jerry or something? Tell me about when you started doing comedy, what the scene was like.
So the first time I think I got on stage was 78 or 79, maybe 78. And I started out as an impressionist. So I auditioned at the Improv, and the way I knew about the Improv, my mother's friend, who was my godmother, she lived in a building in Brooklyn, and one of her neighbors was a wardrobe mistress for film, and she was working on network. So she invited me to actually go to some of the filming. It was at some office building where the studio happened to be in the film, and I got to meet Faye Dunaway and Peter Wolf. She was with Peter Wolf at the time, so it was the coolest thing. I mean, I was like, I don't know, 17. So this wardrobe mistress, she told me about the Improv. So I went down, and during those days, I mean, this was, you had to pick a number. That's how you got on stage. I mean, did you have an experience with that? Like,
Well, I started out in Philly, and we had two open mics. We had the Comedy Works and the Comedy Factory Outlet. The Comedy Factory Outlet, you would sign up, and they pull out of the hat. Everyone got to go, and there's only 25 comics in Philly. This was in
okay,
'88, maybe, and so they pull out of the hat and you get ordered. Well, a lot of us then got jobs as a staff member. We get paid like $5 under the table because one, we could watch the great comics on the weekend when we were seating people,
mhm,
and two, we didn't have to go through the picking of numbers. There's automatically had like spot 3, 4, 5, 8, whatever, and then the Comedy Works, the manager would just put you in an order, and if you didn't like it, you were screwed towards the end. But at that time though, in Philadelphia, the open mics would get like 50 people like in the audience. It wasn't like now you go to an open mic, 5 people, 10 people, and we all got 5 or 6 minutes. So I didn't pull out, I pulled the lists out, but I know if you didn't pick a number, you didn't get to go on, right?
yeah. So you picked a number. I don't know how many people. Maybe there were 20 something people, and they would intersperse you in between regular acts. So it was it was so humiliating because they didn't refer to you by your name. You were just a number. So the MC would come out from the showroom, and you'd be hanging out in the bar, and they'd be like, number 8, like you were cattle, and you would go out and do your set. So I was very lucky. I got a very low number. It's like the draft, a low number, not so great. So I did my act, and I passed the first time. And then I thought, "Oh, okay." And they said, "You come and you hang out." But I thought, "Okay, well, I'll come and hang out, and then I'll go on." And I remember coming back the following Sunday, and I was like, "Can I get on?" I had no idea what the system was, and they looked at me like I was an idiot. Like, "No, you have to hang out." And you know, the deal was, if someone didn't show up, I don't think they would have picked me. They would have picked somebody who was ahead of me up the ladder. Um, so I started at the Improv, and worked there. I remember when I first auditioned, I didn't stay with stand up. I didn't feel like I was ready. So I kind of like, I passed. I went there a couple of times, and then I didn't go back to stand up until a little bit later. And then I went to Catch a Rising Star, and I passed there, and I just wasn't getting a lot of spots. So I was such an idiot. I was like, well, I'll just go out to California and I'll get spots there. So I drove cross country with another comic, and lived there from like 1980 to 84. And I got in at the Comedy Store. I got in at the Improv. Didn't get a lot of spots, but trying to hold my own as much as possible. I worked for an attorney. I became a legal secretary. I never went to school for it. I just became a legal secretary. There was an ad in the LA Times, and the ad said, crazy lawyer looking for crazy secretary, weird hours, blah, 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 blah. I was like, that's the job for me. I tried to get a waitress job because I had waitressed in my life, couldn't get a waitress job. So the guy never called me back. I had an interview with him over the phone, never heard back from him. So I called him the following Monday and I said, I'm just checking to see if I got the job. And he said, yeah, you got the job. So he said, take tomorrow off, come in on Wednesday. So I came in on Wednesday and he's still my friend. He was the coolest guy in the world. You know, we smoked pot, we snorted coke. We had like the greatest time. I worked for him for 4 years and I left because, oh, and whenever I had an audition or I would get like a stand-up gig, he would let me take off. And just as long as I got someone to take my place, to answer phones, do some typing or whatever. And I had my cousin Lenny. My cousin Lenny would fill in for me. And then I had a friend who would fill in for me. And then I started to get some gigs. And I guess then I moved back to New York because I got a bunch of gigs back east and I got a lot of college gigs. And then I moved back to New York in 84 and stayed in LA, really, really honed my craft.
In New York. You stayed in New York.
And I worked at the Comedy Cellar. The Comedy Cellar and the Improv were kind of my two clubs. And then I worked stand-up New York a lot, and I worked Caroline's. And then in 91, I decided I was dating a comic, and he got a gig out there. He got an acting gig, and I decided I was gonna go out and join him, and stayed in New York.
Now, when you were in New York, who were some of your contemporaries? Like, were you? It was like Kathy Labman. I'm guessing. Who was like your group?
So Kathy and I didn't become friends until I moved out to LA. So my group was Scott Blakeman. I don't know if you remember Scott.
Yeah, Scott.
DF Sweedler, Andy Lederer, Dennis Miller a little bit, because Dennis used to come from Pittsburgh. He would come, for like a night or two and hang out at the comic strip mostly. We were late night comics. That's what they called us. I don't know if they called you that in Philly, but late night comics. So, which meant that you would go on, the club was open until 3:00 in the morning. So sometimes you may not go on till 3:00 in the morning. And then the off chance, like I said earlier, if someone didn't show up, there was a good chance that you would go on a little bit earlier. So that was my life. And then like Paul Reiser and Jerry and Larry Miller and there was a woman named Abby Stein who sadly passed away years ago. Adrian Tolsch, Bill Sheft, Lou DiMaggio, John Manfilati, Michael Patrick King. Michael, he was part of a team and then he became just a solo act. Rick Overton. I don't know if you know all these guys.
Rick's on the show. Rick's on the show.
Rick was great. Yeah. So like Bill Maher was part of that crowd. Gilbert Gottfried, Belzer.
It's amazing. It's amazing when you think back and there's so much talent, and people don't know really of, what you mentioned, Adrian Tolsch and stuff like that. And they were like powerhouses. Was Larry Ambrose in that crowd?
Larry Ambrose was in that crowd. Carol was in that crowd. I didn't become really good friends with Carol until I moved out to LA. But Carol and I are, great friends. Reiser, Jerry, and then, so, and those were the days, and especially in New York, and then, the days in the 80s, mostly early 90s, if you were a comic, all you did was hang out at clubs. Even if you didn't go on, you were always at the club. Like when I was in LA from 80 to 84, I was at the Improv every night, and it was a scene. I mean, it was crowded. Like Arsenio Hall was a big act there. Paul Provenza, but every night you were at this club just hanging out, and there was no social life outside of that club. I never did anything else but be at that club.
It's amazing, and in Philly we had a few clubs and we would hang out, but it wasn't like New York. Like open mics would be done by 10:30, and then we go to Nick's Roast Beef for this one cheesesteak place, or down to Dickens Inn, which was this little bar in near the South Street Diner. But it was different. Wasn't the New York scene. So when you get to L.A., and now you had a few TV appearances. I know you need the Improv. You probably did Caroline's. Did you do Caroline's?
I did Caroline's. I did Evening at the Improv. I did Pat Sajak show. That was my first, late night show. And then I was one of the fortunate unfortunates. I got the Tonight Show with Johnny when I was working at comedy club in Buffalo, and it was probably the most horrific week I ever had.
Wait. Was it the Comedy Trap by Fast Eddie
comedy,
Dobowitz?
the Comedy Trap.
I played there.
And I was the headliner, and I had a very difficult week. I just was not clicking with the audience. It was really painful. But I get a phone call in the hotel one night, and he says he's Jim McCauley, who booked the Tonight Show. And I thought it was a friend screwing with me. And I said, "Oh, stop it. Jay," I think I called him Jay. And he said, "No, Sue, it's really Jim McCauley." So he said, "You got the Tonight Show." And I was like, "Oh my God." So we went through what my set was going to be. And he said, "I don't have a date for you right now, but, we'll stay in touch. And, you got the show." So I was it was like the best of times, the worst of times. I was so excited that I got the Tonight Show, but the rest of the weekend was just horrible. I just felt like I was the worst comedian in the world. So I go back to LA, and I'm living with my boyfriend, and we decide we're going to go to Mexico for the weekend. And we made a deal that we weren't going to take our phones with us. And we go. I come home. There's a message on my phone that someone dropped out. This was Johnny's last year, so a lot of people were vying to get on the show, and I missed out on getting on the show. Someone dropped out, and I could have gone on if I was in LA. I could have gone on, but I didn't get it, and then time ran out, and I never got to do it with Johnny. And McCauley called up Jay Leno, who knew me, and said, "Please make sure you put Sue Kolinsky, on in the very, very beginning of your reign, because she got robbed not getting on the show." And Jay honored that. So,
what was it like doing the Tonight Show? I mean, first, for doing it for Johnny, it would have been like, anyone would have been amazing. It's like I had someone on last week who did Letterman with Letterman. Like, that's Letterman's, but with Johnny, it's just legendary. Our parents watched him. But what was it like doing the Tonight Show with Jay? Was it just something? Were you have a little bit of disappointment because it wasn't Johnny? I mean, it sounds odd, or did you just sit there and think it's still the Tonight Show?
yeah, I mean, there was a little disappointment, but I was very excited to do it, and I knew Jay, so I got panel, which was cool. You weren't always, that wasn't always, a guarantee that you were going to get panel, especially with Johnny. And it was good, and it was fun. I had a great set, and we had a great time, and that's just the way it is.
So you're doing good on stand up. You're performing a lot. So when did you go to make the foray into writing and producing? Because you've had you've done a lot in your career. I mean, from the Tonight Show to doing stand up to producing, and now with your podcast. Was it something that you consciously made a decision to move to writing, or was it something where you said, "I just don't feel like dealing with this shit anymore"? Because people don't get it. It's like you're on the road a lot. Like I have friends now. My friend Buddy Fitzpatrick. His kids are grown, so he's doing a lot of cruise ships now. And it's funny because back in the day, cruises were like, "Oh, you're a boat act," but now everybody does them because it's the only. They actually have comedy clubs on the boat now, and it's not like, as back in the day, "Oh, what do you juggle? Oh, go on a cruise." Or a guy would come, "Oh, look, he's doing a skill on a cruise." But now they do it. But he, but for him, because he stayed at home with his kids, now it's like a new life for him. For you, were you just tired of the travel, or what made you go into writing?
It was a lot of that. I kind of saw the writing on the wall as far as, because I always wanted to be an actress. I always, and especially when comedians were getting, shows built around them. I never felt like I had the kind of act that warranted that. So I just thought, I flashed into the future and said, I don't want to be 60, 70, whatever, and be in Vegas. I just didn't want to travel anymore. I was in a relationship. I wanted to try to have kids. Um, I just I just didn't want to do it anymore. So I um, I partnered up with a girlfriend of mine who I met in New York. She was a waitress, but she was an actress and she was a dancer and she was a writer. And when I moved out to LA, she had been here for a little while. And it's funny, we were really good friends when I used to go to stand up New York. We hung out all the time. But for some reason, we never took it outside the club. But I just enjoyed her so much. She was such a cool person. So when I moved out to LA and found out that she was here, we tracked each other down and we decided that we were going to become writing partners. And we wrote some spec scripts. And our first one was Ellen show. Well, it was, yeah, the Ellen's first series. And then we wrote a Mad About You. And then we wrote a Larry Sanders, and we ended up getting an agent. We signed with CAA, which was really cool.
Did you sell those scripts to those shows, or you just wrote specs?
We just wrote specs. Very rarely do your scripts get made, and a lot of times they say that this was kind of the adage years ago. Don't write a script for the show you want to write for, because they're going to really not take it. That it's kind of like they don't want to think that you don't write on the show and then you wrote a show,
Right.
the show that you don't write on. So it's crazy. I know one person that wrote a Mad About You script and ended up getting a job on Mad About You. Anyway, so we get an agent, and then the first time that I auditioned at the Improv when I was a kid, there were these two guys. They were called the Funny Boys. Do you remember the Funny Jimmy Valley?
Yeah, it's Jonathan Schmock and Jim
So
Fallon. They both on Cooper Talk.
right. So they were Schmock and Valley back then, and they were the first comedians that I met standing online, and I remained more friendly with Jimmy than Jonathan, but I've known them since I'm 17 years old. So cut to, we're taking interviews, and they created a show called oh God, it was the Lawrence Brothers show.
Brotherly Love.
Brotherly Love. So we had a meeting with them, and they ended up giving us a job. So my first writing job was from the guys I met when I was 17 years old doing stand-up. So it was very cool. So we did that for a year, and the show, I guess it originally aired on NBC. NBC canceled it, and then when we got the job, it was on the WB. It was a really fun show. It was a cute show. It was a funny show. It was the great writing job. Mike Rowe was on it. Eddie Gordetsky. It was just craziness. It was really an anomaly for what writing shows usually are. We never stayed late. Jimmy and Jonathan would go in their office, and sometimes they would say, "We'll be back in 5," and we'd be in the writer's room, and they'd be like, "Oh, we're just gonna, take a cigarette break, or we're gonna go talk about the show." And sometimes they'd be gone for like 2 hours. So there were times where we would just leave. We'd go shopping. I think once we went to the movies during while we were writing, and they were just the coolest guys in the world. Most sitcoms, you're on the floor when you're taping, so you have to be like, come up with a joke, or if the audience isn't laughing, come up with something on the spot. So this was my first writing job, and I just figured this is how it always is. We had a room above the stage with like couches and monitors, and they had a rule, that Jimmy and Jonathan had a rule: no agents, no managers, no suits were allowed in that room. It was sacred, like the writer's room. And we'd be on the couch and spooning each other. And I mean, HR would have had a field day, with the way we like, we would take naps and Jimmy would be spooning me, and nothing was sexual. It was just, we were just having fun. It was just great. And I remember Jimmy and Jonathan said to my friend Nicole, who was my partner, just know that it's not like this on every show. And it really was the truth. So we did that, and then after the show ended, Nicole and I had created a show that was kind of similar to Sex in the City, but it was only with two women. And one night, um, and we were gonna go out and pitch it. And these were the days where you can go and pitch something in the room and sell it. You wouldn't have to necessarily write a script. So we went to a taping of some show, and Andrew Dice Clay was in the show. That's all I remember. And we met this woman who was a writer, and she said, what do you guys do? And we said, oh, well, we kind of came up with the show. And she said, they're doing a show called Sex in the City. And it sounds very similar to your show. So we did some research, talked to our agents, and we were like, oh, we got to get an interview. I mean, we just created a show that's so much like this. And it took place in New York. So I know Michael Patrick King really well. And our agents told us they're not hiring anybody. It's just going to be Darren Star and Michael. That's it. And we said, well, can you just get us a meeting? And they were like, they're not seeing anybody. So I had a friend that worked at HBO, Carolyn Strauss, a big time producer. So I called up Carolyn, and I said, can you get us in, for a meeting, with Michael? And she says, well, they're really not seeing anybody. I said, Carolyn, it's me. It's Michael. I co-signed for Michael's first credit card when he was living in a basement apartment in New York. I said, get us a meeting. So we got a meeting, and we had the greatest meeting. Our Larry Sanders script was all our scripts were really fun, but it was a really, really great script. And this is a little off color, but so we have a great meeting, and as we're leaving, Michael just randomly says, what do you think about anal sex? Because that's something that maybe they would have on the show. We went from brotherly love to someone asking about anal sex. So I without missing a beat, I said, just as long as there's Quaaludes involved. And he started laughing, and the next day we got a call that we got hired. And I think
So did you write for?
It was because he asked me that question.
Did you write for a season with them, or were you hired for a script, or what was your job
Oh no,
on Sex in the City?
we were on staff. We were the only staff writers. It was me, Nicole, Darren, Michael, um, 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 who was I can't believe I'm like blanking on everybody's names. Candace Bushnell, who wrote the book. She would come fly in from New York and sit with us, sometimes. And then there was a couple of Jenny Bix, who's a big writer. She came and did an outside script, and someone else came and did an outside script. But we were the only staff, just Nicole and I. And so we wrote the first season.
Was that for a year, or
that was the first season? Yeah.
So what happened? Did you leave, or was it just
Well, and our episode was great. I don't know how much you know of Sex in the City, and I hate to toot my own horn, but it was great. It was the Rabbit Pearl. It was the vibrator episode. So
I'm going to ask my wife, because my wife's a big fan. After the show, I'm going to say, you remember the Rabbit Pearl vibrator? Sue wrote that, so I'm going to tell her.
So so my writing partner was kind of antsy, and she wanted to write on her own. So we didn't know. We knew the show was going to be good, but we didn't know what was going on, and they didn't get a pickup like right away. So so we split up, and I was very sad about it. I was very disappointed, and she went off to write on her own. And then I got the radio gig in New York. So I went to New York to do the radio gig.
So now, when do you parlay into working for the Osbournes and the chef shows and all? I mean, when do you get into the reality realm? Because when you started writing, there wasn't really reality. I mean, I was funny. I was, you probably know Cato Kalin, and I used to run into him in Burbank all the time. He said he was like the first reality star because he was on the court all the time. And Larry King would call him like, "You're the first reality star." And but there was no reality TV, so there wasn't that avenue. So when did you parlay into that? Because the radio show ended, then you moved back to LA. And so, what were your plans when you moved back to LA?
So I moved back to LA, and they were doing this thing called Comedy World. It was, I think they were maybe hour or 2 hour radio shows with two comedians hosting, and it was in like this trailer park somewhere, kind of like near West LA, kind of like it was in this like weird warehousey type of neighborhood, and like Alan Havey did it, Kenny Ober and Lou DiMaggio had a show. So because I just came from New York, I was trying to get a gig on that, and I filled in a bunch of times. I joked that I was everybody's Joy Philbin. I filled in, but they never gave me my own show, so it was kind of disappointing, but whatever. So I was looking for a job, and Carol Leifer had called me. She was offered writing for a show. A friend of hers was the head writer of this show called Cheating Spouses Caught on Tape 2. So she didn't want the gig, but she said, she knew I was looking for a job, and she said, why don't you call the guy who's running it? He's a great guy. He's really funny and very cool. I had just um, Kenny Ober was my boyfriend for like 16 years. I just and although we broke up like probably 10 times in the 16 years, this was like the last breakup, and it was just devastating. And so I'm in the throes of this depression. I move out of living with him. I'm like, living in this really cool house in Santa Monica with a big backyard, and we share a dog, and life is good. And then all of a sudden, the floor drops, and I'm like, I'm living in like a back house somewhere, and it ended up being great, but whatever. So for a period of time, I was living with a girlfriend before I had gotten that place, and I get the job. But when I interviewed, I told the guy that I was going. I was very honest with him. I said, I'm going through this like horrible time right now, and I have therapy, and I can't miss my therapy, and it's going to be during the day during work hours. And he just said, don't worry about it. Just as long as you get your work done, go to your therapy. I want you to get better. Don't worry about it. He was the coolest guy in the world. So I wrote on that, and I ended up staying. It was a production company that did a lot of that kind of stuff.
Right.
But what was cool about it was that there weren't a lot of eyes on it, and they let us write really, really racy kind of stuff. They just let us get away with so much, and I never. At first, I was like, "They're never going to let me get away with this," but and I'll share it with you. So there was a situation that was so slimy. It was people that were getting caught cheating on their spouses. I mean, it was just dirty and ugly, and so there was a scene where this woman. I'm trying to think if the woman worked there. Worked at like some, I think it was like a real estate office or something. Yeah, it was a real estate office, and they thought that people were stealing from the company. So she was there after hours, and they were like the room pans, and it's all these computers, all these desktop computers, and then there's just a folding chair in the middle of the room, and the woman is I think the guy was sitting in the chair, and the woman was going down on him. And I wrote something about it being a real estate agent, and I said the woman, the guy, or something about how the guy was raking in the commission, basically, while whatever was going on. And I could not believe that they let it go through. So I did that, and I did like, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 shows with the company, and then Oh, and then I ended up getting another writing job. I got a writing job on Ellen DeGeneres' second series, and where she was a guidance counselor. And I was very unhappy there. Carol Leifer, actually, she was the reason why I got the job. She was one of the showrunners, and it was a very unhappy experience because I did not get along with Ellen. She was not nice to me. I've talked about it so many times, and she was.
I was in the Ellen Show, just like her other. I played one of Huey Lewis in the News, and I played Matt Lauer's head. But I wrote a joke, and I was on Twitter when all the shit was going, and I said I was on Ellen shows. She was very nice. In fact, she let me wash her feet. And people just laughed. I said, because it makes sense. Like, I mean, so because I had Steve Mazan on last week, who he wrote for the Ellen original show. And he said, you didn't know and things, but so you had a bad experience with her. So you weren't happy with the Ellen show.
Yeah, it was horrible. So there's comedian Jeff Stilson. You know Jeff, I'm
I know
sure.
Jeff.
So Jeff was a consultant on Ellen show, and he left to do the Osbournes. He was doing it with this other guy, Greg Johnston. They were both showrunners, and my friend Henriette Mantel got hired as a segment producer, and they were looking for one more segment producer, and she recommended me. And he, since he was a consultant on the Ellen show, he wasn't there every day, but he knew what the vibe was there. He knew I was unhappy. He said, "Do you think she'll want to come over?" Because the pay was going to be a lot lower than scripted TV, and I got the job. It was right around Thanksgiving, and I told Carol and the other showrunner, and they knew how unhappy I was, and I said, "I'm out of here." So I got to work on the Osbournes, and it was, to this day, the greatest gig I've ever had in my life.
What made it so great? Was it Ozzy, or was it just the whole surrounding, or what made it so great?
It was everything. It was brand new. We were breaking ground. We broke ground. Like, the Loud family, probably and Grey Gardens, they were the original docu-follow, shows. Well, the Grey Gardens was a documentary, but the Loud family, do you remember the Loud family in New
No.
York? It was a very, very wealthy family, and Lance Loud, he became very famous. He was like a punk rocker, but he was like, the whole family was completely dysfunctional, and they let cameras in their lives, and they followed them around, and it really destroyed everybody's lives. But this was basically a sitcom reality show, and everybody who worked on the show was amazing. This was the days before you had a production company as a middleman. There weren't a lot of cooks in the kitchen. We were independent contractors. We were producers that just came in and to work on the show. We weren't MTV hires. The only MTV hire there really was one of the showrunners, Greg. Jeff came in as an independent. And so it was just us and MTV. And they just let us do whatever we wanted. And the family was amazing. I got to hang out with the family a lot. I went out, and we worked in I think 4-hour, 5-hour shifts. There was a morning, afternoon, and night crew. And a lot of times we overlapped. And if I was there in the mid crew and I was having a great time, my friend Henriette would come in after me, and we would just hang out, and we would brainstorm together. We were very, very involved. Even though we were low level, we were very involved. And then during the day, after we would, if you worked for whenever you weren't at the house, you would be back at the office watching tape and making notes, and then sitting in the edit bay and crafting the show. And because nothing was scripted, which, as you know, later on, reality became non-reality. We were a slave to the footage, and whatever we shot, we had to just go with what we shot. We never did pickups. We never told them what to say. It was pure reality, and they were gamers. They let us into their lives in such an intimate way. There was only one room in the house we weren't allowed in, and that was Ozzy's private bathroom downstairs in the house. We weren't allowed to shoot in there. When we went to the house, to hang out, or we actually, there was a premiere party at their house. We were allowed to go in and see what the bathroom looked like. But so they were very gracious, and we got to be very, very close with them. And and again, because we were doing something that was so new, um, and the music, like, there was an editor that I worked with, and we couldn't find a song that fit this particular scene that we were editing. And we were, pitching stuff, and nothing was working. And my friend, who was the editor, he played guitar, and he said, "Let's write a song." So I was like, okay. So we just wrote a song that was very literal to what was going on in the house at that moment. And they used it, and they gave us credit. And so anyway, it was great because it was so loose. And you know years later, and not that many years later, I worked on shows where you sat at your desk and you ate your lunch and you worked. This show, and even like early on in my scripted life, and I'm sure in scripted it's probably the same. You got an hour lunch. When I worked on Brotherly Love, and I believe even Ellen show, they paid for lunch. They brought in Starbucks, they brought in ice cream, they brought in Jamba Juice. I mean, we didn't pay for anything, and they would never rob you of your lunchtime. Osborne's, we'd go out, we'd have 2-hour lunches. Yeah, we smoke pot, we'd come back, we'd edit. So many people smoke pot on that show. Nobody cared because the product was working. So they didn't want to rock the boat.
So I got to ask you guys, I was looking at your IMDb. And I want to get to the chef show before we go today, but
Okay.
you worked on the two Corys. Wait,
Yeah.
that Corey? Now tell me, working. Here's a funny story. I have a very good friend. His name is Benny McKay, and a really fascinating guy. Half Norwegian, half African American. His dad played for the Chicago Bears for like 10 years. He never met his dad. His mom was an au pair, beautiful, whatever. Well, he became a boom operator, a lot of reality TV, but somehow he worked on a TV show or a movie with Corey Haim, and he used to have an apartment, like a little house around the corner from my apartment in Burbank. And he had told me that he met Corey Haim, and Corey Haim and his mom had nowhere to go. So he was the nicest guy. So Corey Haim, his mom, and their big dog moved in with him. And I was like, wait a second, Corey Haim lived with you? And it was the most random thing. But now you did the two Corys. Now, how long did that show run?
I think it ran 2 seasons, but I only did the first season. It was very challenging. We shot in Vancouver, um, because Corey Haim couldn't get a visa to come to LA. Um, and it was just, I was just so spoiled from working on shows, because I worked on Newlyweds after the Osbournes, and working on shows where they were just really, really true reality. Then you get into these shows where it became more expensive, and so they plotted everything out. They basically wrote reality, and that was kind of what that show was. And Haim was having a very, very, it was very sad. I mean, he was having a very, very difficult time. He had substance abuse problems. It was very sad. He was really a sweet guy, but he was so troubled. And it just, I can't believe they did another season. It was just mind-boggling that they did another season.
So how'd you end up on the chef shows? And you got nominated for 2 Emmys, I believe, for the
Yes,
right.
I did.
So how did you
Yes.
end up going from Ozzy to chefs?
So I floated around, doing shows like the Two Corys, and I did a bunch of really, really crappy, crappy shows. I went from one crappy show to the next. And my agent got me an interview for Top Chef. And a good friend of mine was a supervising producer. He worked with me one season on the Osbournes, and and I got the job. Really don't I don't cook really. My husband is it used to be a professional chef. Um, he's the cook in the house. Um, and but what it comes down to is story. If you know story, you know story. It doesn't matter what it is. So I got a job working on, I think it was Top Chef Masters, because they did two different Top Chefs. So I did Top Chef Masters, and then I did regular Top Chef. And my friend who got me the job, he ended up leaving, and then I bumped up and I worked on, I don't know, three or four Top Chefs, and then I worked on maybe three Top Chef Masters, and and then I worked on another chef show, and then I didn't work for the company for like 4 years, and then I came back to do something else. So yeah, it was a great run. It was a lot of fun. I never ever was in the field, so I never ate any of the food or anything like that. I always mostly worked in post production with editors in the story department.
So through all these years, did you ever dabble back into stand up, or was that just a past part of your life? Because I know a lot of people, they say like Scrovan wasn't doing stand up, then he got Lou DiMaggio came back for a little bit. Like and I'm back doing it now. I mean, I didn't do it for a long time, but I'm booking 3 different shows next month. I'm running my own shows, but do you miss it, or are you doing it at all again? Because I know Leifer's doing it again. Well, Wendy
Yeah.
Liebman's always done it. Kathy Labman's doing it. Jan Karam, like all those people. Do you ever do it anymore?
No, I did go back though. I guess around maybe 5 years ago, something like that. Wendy Liebman wrote me back into stand up, and she kept on bugging me and bugging me and bugging me. And I said, I don't want to do it anymore. Thank you. I appreciate that you think, I was a great comic. I really appreciate that, but I just don't want to do it anymore. And then her next email was, here's 4 dates, pick one. So
For the
I
Vitello's show, right? Vitello's?
so I went to Vitello's, yeah, and I did it for a little while. I think I did like maybe, did it for like a couple of months, and I had some shows that were great, and then I had some shows that were horrible, and I said, you know what, I can't like start over again. I just that's really what it felt like for me, and I just was like, you know what? I'm, I can't hang out in comedy clubs again. I'm not going to go out at 9 o'clock at night. I'm in my pajamas sometimes at 7. I mean, it's like, I just, it wasn't fun. It wasn't fun anymore. And I just felt like, that ship has sailed. But, every now and then I still write jokes. I write jokes, and sometimes I'll help comedians, friends of mine with jokes. Um, I kind of I get my Jones fix when I'm on the podcast. You know, that's kind of my performance, and I'll social media. I'll write jokes, but no, I
It
don't.
does. It's weird. It's like I do it. It's so funny for me. It's like someone's like, "Oh, you want to go to I'm like, if it's not, I'm not driving more than a half an hour. Like I'll go down the street. Like the clubs I'm booking, one's a place where I do this big networking event. I'm like, that's 15 minutes. And the other one's 20 minutes. And then I did go into Philadelphia to do one for a friend of mine, a benefit, but I'm like, I'm not driving an hour and a half. I don't, I'd rather sit at home on Friday and watch a ball game or just hang out with my wife. So what are you doing now besides a podcast? Are you actively looking for writing jobs, or are you still writing for shows, or?
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple of shows that I've been developing, so trying to sell shows. The podcast, of course, and I'm actually doing a documentary. We're editing a documentary right now. A friend of mine. It's I don't know if you knew Silver Friedman. She was Bud Friedman's wife. She
Yeah.
she created the New York Improv with him, and she gets no credit. So a lot of people don't know who she was. She passed away sadly a couple of years ago. So we want to put her on the map, and we want people to know about her. And she, she came up with the idea, and she probably wouldn't have done it without him, and he definitely would not have done it without her. They needed each other to make it happen, but she was just as important as Bud Friedman. And so we just want people to know about her. And she lived a very colorful life, and she was a very, very cool woman.
That's awesome. So I want to thank you for coming on tonight. It's always good to talk to you. And so now, how can people find the podcast? Where they find them in that?
Wherever you get your podcasts. So it's the Culture Pop Podcast, and we're I guess we're like on everything, Spotify.
You're on YouTube, right?
We're on YouTube, which is really cool because if you just go on Apple, you'll just hear it, so you can actually see it on YouTube.
And are you on Twitter or Threads or Blue Sky?
On Blue Sky, on Threads, and obviously Facebook. So we post it on Blue Sky and Facebook. I got off of Twitter.
Well, go follow Sue and go watch the podcast. There's some great guests. Jesse Martin was just on. Is Paul Guilfoyle? Guy's great, man. That guy's been around forever. And I was like, holy shit, Paul Guilfoyle. Like that's a guy but you know who he is, but you don't sit there and ever go, he's like a Robert Loggia. You never go, hey, I got that Robert. And you go, oh my God,
he's been around forever. He's a really cool guy. We had Carrie Preston on today from Elsbeth, which is really, awesome. Really, fun show. And she was a great guest.
So people go watch their show, listen to it. Go to my different shows. You can go on YouTube. You can find Coop's Comedy Corner. Coop's Comedy Corner. We have 25 episodes up to this is 26. You can go also search the Coop Tank. That's my weekly roundtable of local business people. We talk for an hour, and actually the last 4 weeks I've had all female panels. I think I'm gonna keep doing that because the female business people in this area need a word. I actually have coming up this week. I have 3 young professionals. They're all 26 or 27. They're just getting out into the business world. I met them at different networking events. Also, CooperTalk.net. You can find 1,040 episodes there. I just recently interviewed Stan Lynch, drummer from Tom Petty. So check that out. Also, look up Comedy Trainwreck. That's Jimmy Corhan, my producer, does a great job. He supports a lot of comics in Philly. Legendary Wid has a show with John Kensel. We have Coleman Green. We have Ed McGonigal. So check them out. And if you have any questions, email me, Cooper at CooperTalk.net. If you like comedy, on March 15th, Laughter at the Lanes, I'll be at the Luxury Suite at Splits Bowling Alley down there on Route 73 in Maple Shade. Soundplex Comedy, the one I run is the 21st. It's a Wednesday. We do Cork's Comedy and Connections. It's networking, wine tasting, and comedy. And then on the end of the month, I'll be with Jay Blackwell. It'll be the Death of the Fox Brewing Company. That's Thursday, May 29th. So keep watching, keep listening, keep supporting comedy. Listen to Sue Kolinsky. Go listen to the podcast. Watch it. You're like, holy shit, we love that actor. Anyway, I'm Steve Cooper. You guys have a great weekend.
Coop's Comedy Corner.